You drive past your neighbor's house and her front yard looks completely polished, designed, professional. Then you pull into your own driveway, and while your yard looks nice, it doesn't quite look finished. It isn't yet that magazine-quality property that makes people slow down their cars just to admire the view. You might have spent the exact same money on the same perennials from the local garden center, but somehow her yard looks like a masterpiece, and yours looks like a work in progress. The difference isn't the choice of plants, and it certainly isn't about spending a fortune. The difference comes down to one single design rule that landscape architects charge thousands of dollars to apply to a property. It is so simple that once you know what it is, you will see it everywhere, on every neighborhood walking tour, and on every home that looks effortlessly expensive. 11 specific front yard perennials, when planted according to this one design rule, transform an ordinary suburban front yard into the kind of yard that makes neighbors slow down when they drive past. The total cost to start applying this rule is roughly $150 to $250 in starter plants. The labor is one weekend, maybe two if you take your time and listen to your knees. The result is curb appeal that lasts for the next 20 years from a single correct planting. No annual replanting, no expensive landscape designer, no ongoing maintenance contract, just 11 perennials, one rule, and a yard that finally looks like it belongs to someone who knows what she is doing. I am going to show you the rule first, because once you understand it, every plant choice that follows will make sense. Then I will walk you through the 11 perennials worth your money, exactly how to plant each one, and exactly why each one works in the formula. Pay close attention to the next 2 minutes. The rule is so simple you will not believe it has been kept from you this long. Here is the rule. Plant in groups of 3, 5, or 7. Never plant just one. That is the entire secret. The difference between an expensive-looking front yard and an ordinary front yard is not which plants you choose. It is how many of each plant you plant in one spot. Landscape architects call this massing. Designers call it repetition. The rest of us never call it anything because we were never taught the rule. So we walk into the garden center, we see 12 different plants we like. We buy one of each, we plant one of each scattered around the yard, and we wonder why the result looks scattered and amateur. Of course it looks amateur. It is 12 different individual plants. There is no rhythm. There is no repetition. There is no design. There is just one of everything. The human eye reads repetition as intention. When you see 3 boxwoods together, your brain thinks this was planned. This was designed. This is a professional yard. When you see 1 boxwood, then a different plant, then another different plant, then a 4th different plant, your brain thinks this homeowner went to the garden center and bought what looked nice that day. The plants might be beautiful individually, but the arrangement reads as random because it is random. The rule of 3, 5, or 7 gives the eye permission to relax. It gives the yard a rhythm. It tells anyone walking past that someone thoughtful lives here. And that thoughtful look, that air of intention, is what makes a yard read as expensive. Picture the most expensive front yard you have ever driven past. Maybe it was in a high-end neighborhood you visited. Maybe it was a historic home on a garden tour. Maybe it was a photograph in a magazine. Picture it clearly in your mind. Now count, in your memory, how many different plants you see in that image. The answer is almost always fewer than you would think. 5 or 6 total varieties repeated in groups of 3 to 7, anchored by 1 or 2 structural evergreens, edged by a soft mounding plant, and accented by 1 dramatic flowering perennial. That is the entire formula. The expensive yard is not the yard with the most plants. It is the yard with the most thoughtful repetition of carefully chosen plants. Now let us walk through the 11 perennials that look most dramatically transformed by this rule, plus exactly how many of each one to plant for the magazine cover effect. Plant 1, Boxwood, the foundational evergreen of every expensive American front yard. The plant that landscape architects reach for first when they want to anchor a design and signal a serious attention to the property. Boxwood is technically a shrub rather than a perennial, but in front yard design it functions identically. It returns every year. It requires almost no maintenance once established, and it forms the structural backbone that makes everything else in the yard look more polished by comparison. Boxwood comes in dwarf varieties that stay under 3 feet tall, like Buxus microphylla green velvet and Buxus winter gem, medium varieties that grow to 5 feet tall, and larger varieties for hedging. The dense, small evergreen leaves create a tight, rounded form that responds beautifully to light shaping with hand shears once a year. The plant tolerates sun or shade, holds its color year-round, and provides a clean, dark green background that makes every other plant in the yard look more elegant by contrast. Here is how the expensive yard rule applies to boxwood. Plant 3, plant 5, never plant 1. The single boxwood standing alone next to a porch is the most common mistake in front yard design. It reads as a lonely accent plant rather than a designed element. 3 boxwoods of the same variety in a small grouping near the front door, 5 planted in a line along a walkway, or 3 flanking the garage with another 3 flanking the front door creates the symmetrical anchored look. That signals expense. The plants do not need to be perfectly identical in size when you buy them. They will mature into similar form within 2 to 3 years. Plant boxwoods in part shade to full sun in well-drained soil. Hardy across Hosta zones 5 through 9. A small starter plant from a garden center costs $20 to $35. So, a group of 3 runs $60 to $105. The plants live for decades from a single planting. Light shaping with shears once a year in late spring is the only maintenance required. Avoid heavy pruning, which weakens the plant. The boxwood was the foundational expensive yard plant for our grandmother's generation. It still is. One mistake to avoid with boxwoods: do not mix different boxwood varieties in the same grouping. If you plant 3 boxwoods near the front door, all 3 need to be the same variety. The repetition is what creates the expensive look. Mixing a green velvet with a winter gem with a wintergreen, even though they look similar at the garden center, creates subtle differences in size and shape over the years that visually break the rule. Same variety, same nursery if possible. 3 identical plants that will mature into 3 identical forms. That is the boxwood done correctly. Plant 2. Hosta, the shade-loving foliage plant that becomes the single most dramatic transformation in any shade garden when planted according to the expensive yard rule. Most homeowners have 1 hosta, maybe 2. The yard with 3 hostas grouped together looks immediately more designed. The yard with 5 looks professionally landscaped. The yard with 7 of the same variety planted as a mass drift looks like a botanical garden specimen bed. Hostas form mounds of dramatic foliage that ranges from deep green to frosty blue to neon chartreuse to variegated cream and green. For the expensive front yard look, the blue-leaved varieties create the most dramatic effect because the silvery blue foliage stands out against any green background. Halcyon is the classic medium blue selection. Blue mouse ears is a charming small variety perfect for front-of-bed massing. Sum and Substance is the giant chartreuse variety that anchors a shade bed with a single specimen, but planted in groups of 3 becomes a showstopper. Here is how the expensive yard rule applies to hosta. Plant 5, plant 7. The shade beds along your foundation, under your trees, or framing your front walkway transform when you plant a single variety of hosta in mass groupings rather than collecting different varieties scattered throughout. The visual impact of 5 identical blue hostas is dramatically more elegant than the visual impact of 5 different hosta varieties planted singletons. Repeat the same variety. Trust the design. The yard that looks expensive is not the yard with the most variety. It is the yard with the most intention. Plant hostas in part shade to deep shade in moist, well-drained soil. Hardy Hosta zones 3 through 9. Common varieties cost $8 to $15 per plant, so a group of 5 runs $40 to $75. Specialty cultivars cost more. Each plant returns for 20 to 30 years from a single planting. Annual maintenance is minimal. Cut back the dead foliage in late fall and they emerge fresh every spring. Plant 3, Lamb's Ear, Stachys byzantina pronounced, Stachys byzantina. The silver velvet foliage drift plant that landscape designers use to instantly elevate any garden bed from ordinary to designer installed. Most homeowners have never planted lamb's ear, which is part of why it reads so immediately as expensive when it appears in a yard. Lamb's ear forms low spreading clumps of soft fuzzy silver gray foliage that genuinely looks like the texture of a lamb's ear when you touch it. The leaves are oval, slightly cupped, and covered in fine silver hairs that give the plant its distinctive luminous quality. The plant produces small pink-purple flower spikes in early summer, but the silver foliage is what makes it valuable in front yard design. That silver creates contrast against every other green or dark plant in the yard, drawing the eye and adding the kind of color variety that expensive landscapes always feature. Here is how the expensive yard rule applies to lamb's ear. Plant 7 or more. This is one of the few perennials on this list where the group size goes up significantly. Lamb's ear creates its dramatic effect through drift planting, a continuous flowing mass of silver across the front edge of a garden bed, along a walkway, or in front of a row of dark foliaged plants. A single lamb's ear in a bed looks like a mistake. 7 lamb's ear plants flowing in a drift along the edge of your garden bed looks like the cover of a high-end landscape magazine. Plant lamb's ear in full sun in well-drained soil. Hardy Hosta zones 4 through 8. The plants spread modestly, so a single grouping will fill about a 6-foot drift within 2 seasons. A small starter plant from a garden center costs $5 to $10, so a drift of 7 runs $35 to $70. The plants return reliably for 8 to 12 years and benefit from being divided every 4 years to maintain their dense form. One mistake to avoid with lamb's ear: cut off the flower spikes when they appear in early summer before they fully bloom. The flower spikes are not the point of this plant. The silver foliage is the point. Allowing the flowers to bloom and set seed weakens the foliage display and makes the plant look messy and unfinished. Cut them off at the base as soon as they emerge. Your drift will stay clean, silver, and architectural for the entire growing season. The professional landscapers who use lamb's ear always remove the flowers. The homeowners who do not end up with a plant that looks scraggly by midsummer. Plant 4, Heuchera, pronounced Heuchera, also called coral bells. The foliage plant that comes in colors no other perennial offers: burgundy, copper lime, silver, peach, deep purple, and stunning variegated combinations. Heuchera reads as expensive because the modern cultivars are what high-end specialty nurseries feature and what big box stores rarely carry well. The yard with Heuchera in dramatic foliage colors looks like the homeowner shopped at a specialty nursery, which always reads as a higher level of gardening expertise. Heuchera forms compact mounds of large lobed leaves in dramatic colors. Obsidian is nearly black-purple. Caramel is warm copper-orange. Lime marmalade is electric chartreuse. Silver scrolls has metallic silver veining over green. The plant also produces tall, delicate flower spikes with small, bell-shaped flowers in late spring, but the foliage is what makes it valuable for front yard design. Those colored leaves provide season-long interest from early spring through hard frost in October. Here is how the expensive yard rule applies to Heuchera. Plant 3 of one color plus 3 of a contrasting color. This is the variation on the rule that works specifically for Heuchera because of the dramatic color palette. 3 burgundy obsidian planted in one spot, paired with 3 copper caramel planted in another spot in the same bed, creates the layered foliage contrast that high-end landscape designers charge thousands for. 2 colors, 3 plants of each. Repeat across the bed. The result is a design tapestry of foliage color that lasts the entire growing season. Plant Heuchera in part shade to morning sun in moist, well-drained soil. Hardy Hosta zones 4 through 9. Modern cultivars cost $10 to $18 per plant. A grouping of 6 plants, 3 of each color, runs $60 to $108. Heucheras live 6 to 10 years before they decline and need replacement. Shorter than most perennials on this list, but the dramatic foliage effect is worth it. Russian sage, Profotripsifolia, pronounced Perovskia atripsifolia, the airy silvery blue Mediterranean perennial that signals high-end landscape design to anyone who knows what they are looking at. Russian sage is the plant that landscape designers use when they want to add soft architectural texture to a yard without committing to a major Structural plant. It reads as expensive because it has the soft, pillowy form that designers love and amateurs rarely think to plant. Russian sage forms an upright clump 3 to 4 feet tall with finely divided silvery gray-green aromatic foliage and long spikes of small lavender blue flowers from midsummer through fall. The plant has a soft, hazy quality that catches light beautifully, particularly in the late afternoon when the silvery foliage seems to glow. The Mediterranean appearance reads as expensive because Mediterranean gardens are associated with high-end residential design and landscape architecture. Here is how the expensive yard rule applies to Russian sage. Plant 3. 3 Russian sage clumps planted in a triangle formation, with the plants spaced about 3 feet apart, creates a dramatic silver-blue cloud in the front yard that becomes the centerpiece of any sunny bed. A single Russian sage looks lonely. 5 Russian sages in a row looks like an overplanted hedge. 3 Russian sages in a triangle is the magic number. Substantial enough to create presence, restrained enough to read as designed rather than random. Plant Russian sage in full sun in well-drained soil, hardy Hosta zones 4 through 9. A small starter plant costs $8 to $15. A grouping of 3 runs $24 to $45. The plants live 10 to 15 years and require almost no maintenance. Just cut back the dead stems in early spring before new growth appears. Plant 6. Catmint, pronounced Nepeta, the mounded silver-green perennial with lavender blue flowers that creates the soft, pillowy edging that every expensive front yard seems to feature. Catmint is the plant that landscape designers use to soften hard edges. The line where a garden bed meets a lawn, the edge of a stone walkway, the foundation of the house. The yard with catmint along the walkway always reads as more designed than the yard without. Catmint forms a spreading mounded clump of soft gray-green aromatic foliage covered in spikes of small lavender blue flowers from late spring through fall. The plant reaches 1 to 2 feet tall and 2 to 3 feet wide. Mature plants form a continuous wave of blue along the front of a bed for nearly 5 months of the year. The aromatic foliage is also deer-resistant and bee-friendly, which makes catmint useful beyond just its visual appeal. Here is how the expensive yard rule applies to catmint. Plant 5. Plant 7. Catmint is one of the perennials where the larger group sizes create the most dramatic effect because the plants spread and merge into a continuous wave of color. 5 catmint plants spaced 2 feet apart along the front edge of a garden bed creates a 4-month continuous bloom edge that softens every hard architectural line in the yard. 7 plants creates a more substantial wave for a longer bed. The Walker's Low cultivar is the most reliable for front yard design because it stays compact and never flops. Plant catmint in full sun in average garden soil. Hardy Hosta zones 3 through 8. A small starter plant costs $6 to $12. A grouping of 5 runs $30 to $60. The plants return reliably for 10 to 15 years and benefit from being cut back in midsummer to encourage a strong second bloom in late summer. Plant 7. Astilbe, pronounced Astilbe, the feathery plume perennial that gives shade beds the high-end designer look most homeowners never achieve because they default to hostas, impatiens. The yard with Astilbe and shade beds always reads as one level more sophisticated than the yard without. It is the plant that signals the homeowner went beyond the basic shade garden list and chose something more refined. Astilbe forms upright clumps of dramatic feathery plume flowers in white, pink, coral, lavender, or deep burgundy depending on the cultivar. The plants reach 1 to 4 feet tall depending on the variety and produce flower plumes that last about 3 weeks in late spring or early summer. The plumes give the shade bed vertical movement and color in a season when most shade plants are content to be just green. The ferny foliage continues to provide texture even after the plumes fade in late summer. Here is how the expensive yard rule applies to Astilbe. Plant 5. Plant 7. Astilbe creates its dramatic effect through grouping that lets multiple plume colors blend together in a shade bed. 5 astilbes of the same color planted together creates a coordinated mass of pink or coral or white. 7 astilbes mixing 2 colors, 3 pink with 4 white, creates a designed shade tapestry that looks deliberate and elegant. The single Astilbe lost in a shade bed gets visually overwhelmed by larger surrounding hostas and ferns. Plant Astilbe in part to deep shade in moist, humus-rich soil. Hardy Hosta zones 4 through 8. Astilbes need consistent moisture to thrive. They do not tolerate drought well. A small starter plant costs $8 to $15. A grouping of 5 runs $40 to $75. The plants live 5 to 10 years and benefit from being divided every 4 to 5 years to maintain vigor. Plant 8. Coneflower. Echinacea purpurea, pronounced Echinacea purpurea. The native prairie plant that has been elevated by modern cultivar development from a wildflower into a sophisticated front yard perennial. The yard with modern coneflower cultivars in dramatic colors reads as carefully chosen because the modern varieties, the Sombrero series, the Pow Wow series, Cheyenne Spirit, Hot Papaya are what specialty nurseries feature and casual gardeners rarely plant. Modern coneflowers produce dramatic large flowers with coppery orange textured central cones surrounded by petals in colors that range far beyond the original purple pink. The Sombrero series alone produces salmon, yellow-white, red, orange, and bicolor flowers. Cheyenne Spirit is a single seed mix that produces multiple colors from one packet. The plants stand 24 to 36 inches tall on rigid stems that never need staking and bloom from early summer through first frost. Here is how the expensive yard rule applies to coneflower. Plant 7. Plant 9. Coneflowers create the most dramatic visual impact when planted in larger groupings of one color or when planted as a mass of mixed colors from a single seed strain like Cheyenne Spirit. 7 yellow coneflowers planted together becomes a sun-catching golden mass. 9 plants of mixed Cheyenne Spirit colors becomes a beautiful tapestry that draws every eye driving past the house. The single modern coneflower planted alone gets visually drowned in any larger bed. Plant flown flowers in full sun in well-drained soil. Hardy Hosta zones 3 through 9. Modern cultivar starter plants cost $10 to $15 each. A grouping of 7 runs $70 to $105. The plants live 6 to 10 years and benefit from division every 3 to 4 years to maintain bloom production. Plant 9. Perennial Salvia. Specifically the Salvia nemorosa, pronounced Salvia nemorosa, varieties like Maynite, Caradonna, and Blue Hill. The vertical, purple-violet flower spike perennial that creates the dramatic sculptural presence every expensive front yard features somewhere. Salvia reads as expensive because it has the strong architectural form that designers love and amateurs underuse in their plant selections. Perennial salvia forms tidy compact clumps 2 to 3 feet tall with aromatic gray-green or deep green foliage and dense vertical spikes of small, intense purple-violet flowers from late spring through midsummer. Caradonna has particularly dramatic dark purple stems that hold the flower spikes upright like deliberate sculptures. The dense vertical flower spikes provide the upright contrast that balances the mounded forms of catmint, lamb's ear, and Russian sage. In a design bed, salvia is the exclamation point that lifts everything around it. Here is how the expensive yard rule applies to salvia. Plant 5. Plant 7. Salvia creates the dramatic wave of purple that landscape designers use to draw the eye across a long bed. 5 salvias spaced 2 feet apart creates a continuous wave of vertical purple flower spikes. 7 plants creates the kind of dramatic mass that gets photographed by everyone walking past with a smartphone. A single salvia in a mixed bed gets visually lost among the surrounding plants. Plant perennial salvia in full sun in well-drained soil. Hardy Hosta zones 4 through 8. A small starter plant costs $7 to $12. A grouping of 5 runs $35 to $60. The plants return reliably for 8 to 12 years and bloom heavily when cut back after the first flush of flowers to encourage a strong second bloom in late summer. Peony, Paeonia lactiflora, pronounced Paeonia lactiflora. The luxury perennial that has signaled wealth and good taste in gardens for over 100 years. Peonies are the plant that everyone associates with old money front yards and historic homes. They live so long, 50 years or more, from a single planting, that they actively communicate this homeowner has been here a long time and knows what she is doing. Peonies form substantial bushy plants 2 to 3 feet tall and equally wide with deep green, deeply divided foliage and enormous layered flowers in white, pink, coral, or red depending on the cultivar. The flowers appear for roughly 3 weeks in late spring or early summer and are unmatched for sheer luxury. The layered, pillowy blooms look like ruffled silk and produce a sweet fragrance that perfumes the entire front yard during peak bloom. Here is how the expensive yard rule applies to peonies. Plant 3 peonies of the same color planted in a triangle formation, with the plants spaced about 3 feet apart, creates the kind of curated luxury moment that signals an expensive home, expensive yard, and expensive taste. A single peony is a centerpiece. 3 peonies of the same color is a designed luxury statement. The plants do not need to be expensive cultivars. Even common pink peonies look stunning when grouped according to the rule. Plant peonies in full sun in deep, rich, well-drained soil. Hardy Hosta zones 3 through 8. A bare root division from a garden center costs $15 to $25. A specialty cultivar from a peony nursery costs $25 to $50. A grouping of 3 runs $45 to $150. The plants live 50 years or more and rarely need attention. Plant the tubers with the pink eyes pointing up, no more than 2 inches deep at planting time. This single detail is the difference between blooming peonies and non-blooming peonies for the next decade. One mistake to avoid with peonies: do not move them once they are planted. Peonies dislike root disturbance more than almost any perennial on this list. A peony that has been growing in one spot for 5 years and then gets moved can refuse to bloom for 2 to 3 years afterward. Choose the location for your 3 peonies carefully before you plant. Pick the spot where you want luxury blooms for the next 50 years. Then commit to that spot and never move them. The grandmothers who had stunning peonies in the same spot for their entire lives knew this rule. Plant once, plant carefully, leave them alone. Karl Foerster feather reed grass, Calamagrostis acutiflora, pronounced Calamagrostis acutiflora, Karl Foerster, the single most popular ornamental grass in high-end landscape design, and the plant that elevates a front yard from flat to architectural more dramatically than any other plant on this list. Karl Foerster grass reads as expensive because it is what professional landscape designers actually plant in commercial properties, hotel landscapes, and high-end residential designs. Karl Foerster grass forms upright clumps of fine green foliage that send up tall golden flower plumes in early summer. The plumes start as pinkish tan, mature to wheat gold, and persist on the plant through autumn and into winter, providing dramatic vertical structural presence in every season. The plant reaches 4 to 5 feet tall in bloom, 2 to 3 feet wide, and stands upright reliably without flopping or staking. The golden plumes catch wind and light in ways that no static plant can match. Here is how the expensive yard rule applies to Karl Foerster grass. Plant 3, plant 5. 3 Karl Foerster grasses planted in a line along the back of a sunny bed creates the structural vertical anchor that lets shorter plants in front read as a layered design composition rather than a flat bed. 5 grasses planted in a row along a long bed creates the rhythm that makes high-end landscapes look intentional. A single Karl Foerster grass standing alone looks like a forgotten plant. 3 or 5 looks like the centerpiece of a designed yard. Plant Karl Foerster grass in full sun to part sun in average well-drained soil. Hardy Hosta zones 4 through 9. A starter plant costs $12 to $20. A grouping of 3 runs $36 to $60. The plants return reliably for 15 to 20 years and require almost no maintenance. Just cut back the dead foliage in early spring before new growth emerges. One mistake to avoid with Karl Foerster grass: do not cut it back in fall. The dead golden plumes are the entire point of having this plant through the winter months. The plumes catch winter light, hold snow elegantly, and provide structural interest from November through March when nothing else in the yard is doing anything. Cutting back in fall removes 7 months of visual value. Wait until early spring, just before new green growth emerges from the base. Then cut the entire clump back to about 6 inches. The plant will send up fresh foliage within weeks and produce new plumes by midsummer. This single timing decision is the difference between a yard with year-round structure and a yard that goes flat in winter. 11 front yard perennials. 1 design rule: plant in groups of 3, 5, or 7. Never plant just one. The Boxwoods, the hostas, the lamb's ear, the Heuchera, the Russian sage, the Catmint, the Astilbe, the Coneflowers, the Salvia, the Peonies, and the Karl Foerster grass. All of them transform from ordinary plants into expensive-looking front yard features when planted according to this 1 rule. The investment to start building your expensive yard look is roughly $150 to $250 in starter plants, plus 1 or 2 weekends of planting time. The result is a front yard that looks designed, intentional, and expensive for the next 20 years from 1 afternoon of correct planting. Here is what I want you to take away from this video. You have not been bad at gardening for all these years. You have not been wasteful. You have not been making poor plant choices. You have been working without the 1 rule that landscape architects use to make every yard they design look polished. Nobody taught you the rule because the rule is so simple that nobody profits from telling you. Garden centers profit from you buying one of everything. Landscape designers profit from you not knowing how to apply the rule yourself. Now you know. Walk into your front yard tomorrow morning. Look at where you have one of something. Mark those spots. Next time you go to the garden center, buy 3 of the same plant instead of 3 different plants. That is the entire shift. From this point forward, your yard starts looking expensive. Before you go, drop a comment below telling me which of these 11 perennials you already have in your yard but only have 1 of, because we have all done it and I read every single comment. If this video opened your eyes tonight, share it with a neighbor, a sister, or a friend at church who is still walking past her own front yard wondering why it does not look as polished as the one across the street. And subscribe to this channel before you go, because next week we cover another design rule that landscape architects know and never tell their clients, and you will not want to miss it. The yard is yours. The rule is yours. Now go make it look like the most expensive yard on the block for the price of a few weekend trips to the garden center.